to MMA Meltdown. I'm your host, Adrienne Bumpy Johnson, along with my co-host, Josh Davis from MMA Corner, and we are here to discuss UFC 182 in depth. And man, what a card it was. Daniel Cormier and John Jones, the champion, trying to set history. John Jones is trying to break history and make more history. What a fight, Carl.
You know, the card was excellent. It started off, the main card anyway, started off with Hector Lombard versus Josh Berkman. And again, this fight was billed to be striker versus striker. And before I start rambling about it, Bumpy, give us your thoughts.
Absolutely. I felt Hector pressed the fight, and both fighters always have a game plan going in. But when you taste another fighter's power of the caliber of a Hector Lombard, sometimes your game plan goes out the window. And it appeared Josh began to backpedal. He was always on the back foot, never really wanted to engage. Who would when you're fighting a guy like Hector Lombard? That's just a real tall order to ask. But you thought that being the veteran Josh is, he would have had a different dynamic. And he just didn't have one last night. He only had one button, and it was backwards.
You know, first off, I'm a huge fan of Berkman, and I expected him, even though he didn't want the fight, he made it very clear coming back to the UFC that was not the fight he was hoping for. I still expected him to try and press the action and put Hector backpedaling as opposed to running the whole fight like he did. And because of that, he allowed Hector to land shots, to do the things that Hector needed to do. And Josh was fighting scared that entire night. From the moment he first got hit, he didn't want to be in there. He did not want to be in there. He ran around the cage. He looked like he was scared, and he was fighting scared. And that was one thing I've never seen from Josh Berkman, because we've all seen Berkman get beat up before. It's happened. You know, he's got some losses on his resume. But I did not expect him to just run around like that. I expected him to bring the fight to Hector, and he didn't, and he looked bad last night.
Now, Josh, let me ask you this. When you enter the UFC, you have to fight whoever they put in front of you. As a champion, we expect you to fight everybody put in front of you. So I'm going to ask you, Josh, and I'm going to ask you, Josh, if you're not willing to fight all the contenders on the table, are you really considering yourself to be the next champion? Or are you really fooling yourself and you just want a little spotlight, a little time in front of the camera to display your skills? Is he more of a gatekeeper fighter now that we know he doesn't want to fight the bigger names?
You know, I think that's exactly what he is. He's a gatekeeper at best. I don't want to say he's too good for the World Series of Fighting or one of these other promotions, because they all have talent, but he is a guy that should be in the UFC, and he should be the guy that people debut against. You know, he's one of those guys. But the thing that Josh proved to me last night, and again, it's no disrespect, as athletes we all hit this point in our career, he showed me he doesn't want to be a champion anymore. He doesn't have that mentality. Last night he was fighting for a paycheck. He took a beating, but he got paid for it. He collected his paycheck, his sponsorship money, and, you know, that was not the Josh Berkman that I expected to see. So, again, as a media person, he let me know he's no longer fighting for that title.
Absolutely. And maybe that's not what the fans want to see as we move further down the card and cover some of these other fights. We want to see guys who are out to get the gold. There's a lot of people trying to break into the UFC. You got a whole house full of UFC fighters on a regular basis as they run their television show. You have to want it. And if you don't want it, or if you're not willing to test yourself or put yourself through the type of danger that a Hector Lombard presents,
yep,
maybe you should be fighting on the World Series of Fighting. It's that simple.
And you brought up a good point, which will segue into the next fight. But real quickly, after the fight, during the post-fight press conference, Hector Lombard made it very clear that he wants Rory McDonald. You know, since Rory's the top guy who's not getting the title shot, Hector wants to fight him. He wants to earn his title shot. Speaking of, Luis Gagnon versus Kyoji Hiraguchi. Kyoji Hiraguchi is a guy who last night showed that he wants to fight for that title. He went out, he put his stamp down, he looked good. What'd you think?
I thought he looked awesome, in fact. And when we talk about wanting to fight for the title, there's a difference between saying I want the champion now, I'm ready for the champion now, and what Haraguchi said in his post-fight conference, which after he put on such a dominating performance, when you say things like, I do want a title shot, but let me build up to it. I have things I need to improve on. This is a respectable statement. This is a respectable fighter, and he's obviously ready for a title shot. But what an intelligent, veteran-like statement to make when you make a comment such as, I do want the champ, but I need to work on a few more things against top competitors.
And I know there's been some talk about how Haraguchi could have done this and done that. He manhandled Luis Gaudino, a guy who is an elite level fighter, and he made him look like me, to be honest. I mean, he was in there, just beat the crap out of him. And so, yeah, I do think he is ready for a title shot. If the UFC wants to continue to build his star power here in the States, they could give him another fight. He doesn't need it. He's ready for a title shot. And across the pond over in Asia, he's already got the star power. So he showed it last night that he was fighting for a title. He's a guy who's not coming in here for a paycheck. He wants to be the best. And last night, he showed it.
Absolutely. When you speak about polishing a fighter up and you talk about what will make a star, Haraguchi basically needs to take a page out of the Korean Zombies book.
Absolutely.
Brush up on a little English. I speak 8 different languages. Over here, English is what gets by. So a few English statements, a few English comments, the crowd will love you. And then his fighting ability. How do you compare him with the current champion of that division?
I think he matches up very well. I mean, first off, there's not a lot of depth in that division. There's not a lot of guys who really can compete with the champion right now, and he's proved that because he's cleaned out everybody. I think marketing-wise, skill set-wise, I think this is a perfect fight that makes sense for the division. Because I'll throw this out. If not Haraguchi, then who else are we talking about?
Exactly. Mighty Mouse has a tall order. Haraguchi just seems to be possibly the total package when it comes to grappling. His striking could improve in certain spots, so I understand him wanting to face a few more top competitors. But as you say that, who else is a top competitor that could do anything to Haraguchi that you see in the rankings?
There's not. I mean, other than Mighty Mouse, the only other fight that anyone really wants to see is Mighty Mouse and John Dodson. Well, that's not going to happen due to Dodson's injury. So in the meantime, this fight makes perfect sense. And okay, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that Haraguchi gets his butt whooped, that Johnson absolutely schools him. He's still a young guy. He's still got a lot of time to grow. He can work himself back up that ladder. Not to mention, now he knows what he needs to work on. He knows where he got schooled, so he can go back to the gym, get with his coaches, and fix those areas. I think it's a win-win situation for the kid.
Absolutely. Now, let me ask you this, because I've coached fighters. We'll talk about a fighter that I've coached later on in the show. But when you talk about coaching a guy and putting him in against a fighter who will possibly dominate him or change the way he fights after that type of battle, do you want to risk a prospect like Haraguchi going into a world title fight? Or do you do what Haraguchi states, give me some more top competitors before I'm able to fight a championship bout? Should you throw him in there to the wolves because he looks so good he could possibly win the fight? Or how do you go about it?
I do what the UFC did to George St. Pierre. I throw him in there with the Matt Hughes, even though he doesn't deserve it, and let him see what he does. Now, if you go back and watch the first fight between GSP and Matt Hughes, yes, Matt Hughes won with the armbar with 1 second left. 4 minutes and 30 seconds of that round, GSP was completely dominant. He did not realize how dominant he was in the fight until he went back with his coaches and started watching stuff. Realized how dominant he was, and look at him now. I'm not saying Haraguchi is that guy, but he could be that guy. You know, let's throw him in there. Let's see what he has. And again, if he gets beat, then he'll know what to work on. I don't want to dog on us Americans, but over there, again, in Asia, they have a different mindset on the way that they train. I guarantee you, if Demetrius Johnson completely outclasses Haraguchi, he will go back and become this new animal that be the best thing for him. So I think give him that fight. I think it makes sense. And for DJ, again, what else do you have to do? You're sitting there, you're playing Call of Duty right now, so you might as well start training for Hiraguchi. I think the fight makes sense. I think he earned it with that performance last night. Those are my thoughts.
Fans, we want you to go to MMA Meltdown before we cover this next bout. Type your opinion. Let us know what you think. What should Hiraguchi do? Should he be thrusted into a title match? Should he fight the next contender? And if so, who? You let us know.
Well, in this next fight, I can tell you a guy who is not getting any title fights anytime soon, and that's Nate Marquardt. He went up against Brad Tavares last night. And first off, I don't want to take anything away from Brad because he looked excellent. He went out. He got off the schneid. He two-fight losing streak. He came in. He looked good against Nate Marquardt. But I'm going to be honest. I've been covering Nate for a very long time, back when he was in Pancrase. And the fighter that calls himself Nate Marquardt today is not the guy that we're accustomed to seeing. I know he's 35 years old, and he's getting up there, and you coached him, you trained him back in the day. What's up with Nate? Because he's not the same guy. The guy that fought last night, I'll be honest, I don't ever want to see that guy in the octagon again. That guy has got to go. Either the real Nate needs to come back, or it's time to start thinking about retirement.
You know, it made me reflect on a comment I seen on Facebook from a gentleman who used to train with him. Was very harsh. I know there's some bad blood, but when you leave a performance out there for the audience that allows anyone to say something of that nature, you have to question who you are inside. Being one of Nate's first trainers as he was a kiddo, him and Bang Ludwig, in fact, to see him out there, hands down, looking more journeyman than Nate the Great, it upset me. And it made me wonder, does Nate have the fire to go forth and capture a title? Because if you don't have a title instinct within you, as we just covered with Josh Berkman, what are you doing in the UFC? Maybe the World Series of Fighting is your plateau. I want to bring in an analyst who also used to train Nate Marquardt, Curtis Hill, very excellent jiu-jitsu specialist, all around, and knows Nate inside out.
And while Curtis is getting set up to come in, you know, I've known Nate 20 years. I'm a little bit older than him, but we went to high school together. And so I truly have seen his progression. And to see him reach the pinnacle and fight Anderson Silva, and the fight he was doing very well, and until he got clipped, to this, I mean, it's I don't want to say it's disappointing, but as his friend and as a fan, I'd have to say absolutely it is disappointing, because on the piece that I did covering the fight for the MMA Corner, I actually predicted Nate to win. I thought this was a very winnable fight for him. I thought he'd be able to deal with Tavares' size and strength. I thought that Marquardt would be the better striker. I thought he'd be stronger in the clinch, and if the fight went to the ground, you know, I'm always comfortable with Nate's jiu-jitsu skills. But where was that last night? Where was any of that last night?
That is a very good question. And Nate seemed almost desperate to get the fight to the ground. Where he had moments of brilliance standing up. There was, especially, I believe it was in the second round, an exchange towards the end where he caught Nate with, or where Nate got caught with the cross, came back with the three-punch combination, and seemed to do damage to Tavares, but never took advantage. And this is not the Nate the Great we know. Nate is great. Those two words are synonymous. And this is not the Nate that we know. When your hands are down, there's no footwork, so you're getting caught with the punches. His left eye was pink, you know, from the jabs he took. There was no head movement. You know, staples of a champion, staples of things that we've come to know common for Nate Marquardt. And it just wasn't there. And it was upsetting to see as one of his former striking coaches, because I know what he has in his repertoire. Curtis Hill has declined to comment. No big deal, understandable. Nate, get down to Colorado, come train with us here. We miss you, and we can develop you. He still has abilities in his repertoire that can be pulled out. I don't think he's a shot fighter, but he needs to start shooting as a fighter.
Well, and for me, I think the big thing for Nate is he needs to determine whether or not he still has the desire to fight. It's one thing to have the desire to compete. I mean, I'm older than Nate. I still have the desire to compete. I have no desire to fight anybody at any time. So it's completely different to want to step in there and actually fight someone. And last night against Brad Tavares, he did not want to fight. There were some exchanges, but he did not want to fight. And to be honest, Tavares coming off the 2 losses, the KO loss to Bosch where he was winning that fight, I thought this was a prime time for Nate to go in there, put the stamp down, remind everybody who Nate Marquardt is, and he didn't do it. He went out there and he laid an egg. And I haven't talked to him, but I imagine he's pretty disappointed right now.
Absolutely. When I think Nate Marquardt, I think of his trainers. I think of Tommy Johnson. I think of Clarence Thatch. I think of Curtis Hill. I think of Trevor at Grudge.
Trevor Whitman.
Boss Rutan. I think of his greater moments. So when I see Nate Marquardt, if the 7-time King of Pancrase, 10 I think he ended out at. But when you have the Pancrase title that many times, I expect you to fire off. I expect you to show savvy. You can't let journeyman fighters get in there and bewilder you or baffle you with offense that's not really, it wasn't something outstanding that Tavares did.
No.
They both look kind of there. Somebody pulled the trigger here and there, but no one pressed the advantage. It was kind of a sit-around fight. And the boos from the crowd kind of showed that. You have to, when you're on the grand stage of the UFC, you need to show us everything in your repertoire, in every fight, especially when you're healthy. It's one thing if you were injured, it's another thing when you're healthy and you just don't perform.
Exactly, and I don't want to beat Nate up any more than Brad did, so I will say this, like you just brought up, the fans said it all when they were booing about the fight. I don't ever condone booing because anytime you have 2 guys in the cage going at it, it takes some serious courage to do that. But that fight was not exciting. Anyone who was a Marquardt fan, I guarantee you we were all screaming at our TVs because that's not who Nate is. But there were other great performers on the card, and moving right along to another great performance. One he was disappointed about, which was a little surprising, but Donald Cerrone versus Miles Jury. This again was another great fight between a pinnacle of the division against one of the up-and-coming lions. Turned out to be what a lot of us thought it would. The older veteran showing the young guy, hey, you still got some things to learn. But Cerrone went in, again, put his stamp down, 6 wins in a row. Where do you think he is for a title shot?
Well, to be honest, I know Cerrone from his kickboxing days. Okay, so I can go all the way back to Ring of Fire. I can go all the way back to Red and Jerry's fights. Okay, Donald Cerrone is a beast in waiting, and if anyone makes the mistake of signing paperwork with him, you better bring your A++ game, because as you've seen with Miles, who was on a win streak, hadn't been defeated in the UFC, he picked out the holes. And he did it comfortably, walking forward without throwing a jab, which is something I'm not used to seeing Cerrone do, this is his new style as of late. When I trained with him down at Keith Smeltzer's and Mike Silva's gym, he always threw a jab. I made sure he threw a jab, because if he didn't, he would catch the right hook. So Cerrone, if he ever decides to throw jabs on a regular basis, these fighters are in trouble. He had a 19-0 kickboxing record, so I didn't expect anything from Miles to be dangerous. I thought maybe on the ground something could happen. But from the very onset of the omoplata setup to the taking of Miles back, and total control and total disregard for Miles' power and ability, you knew Donald Cerrone had championship fighting written all over him, and all of a sudden we get thrown Anthony Pettis versus so-and-so, whoever that is. And I'm pretty sure Anthony will run through that guy. It sounds like a tough matchup, but the real matchup we want to see is Cerrone versus Pettis.
Well, Cerrone looked good last night. We'll get to that in a second. I can't say anything against Rafael Dos Anjos. First off, he did beat Cerrone. He's Cerrone's last loss, so I can't really take anything away from him there. And, you know, he, again, just whooped on Nate Diaz, then whooped on Ben Henderson. So the guy probably deserves the title shot. I want Cerrone to get his rematch like everybody else. I also want to see Habib Nurmagomedov get his title shot. There's a lot of parity at 125 or 155, but I was extremely pleased with Cerrone's performance last night. He's known as a slow starter. He was able to set up the omoplata off the takedown, eventually transition, get his back. I thought he was going to finish the fight with the rear naked choke in the first round. Hats off to Miles Jury for being able to withstand that, because it was deep. I mean, his back was arched, the figure four body lock was in there. It was deep. So it was good of him to get out of that. But after that, he had nothing to offer Cerrone. He didn't want anything to do with Donald on the feet. He certainly didn't want to really try any takedowns. He went for the clinch a few times, but Cerrone proved that, you know, he is the man in waiting. And the thing about Cerrone is he fought last night already calling out to get a shot to fight in Denver on Valentine's Day. So Dana White said he was game, so we'll see if he gets an opponent. But if Cerrone keeps winning, again, 6 straight victories, he's getting a second shot at Pettis.
Absolutely, and I think he deserves a second shot at Pettis. And not to disrespect Rafael Dos Santos, but I just think Cerrone is going to be a different animal in the cage with the champion again, or even in a rematch with Rafael. I've still picked Cerrone again. He just seemed to toy cat and mouse style almost with Miles. When he had him on his back, he's kind of just nudging him.
Yep.
No hard shots. He hit him with an elbow just to wake him up. But he seemed disappointed in his post-fight interview with the way the fight was going. And at the end of the 3rd round, if you've seen the way he was loading up with those roundhouse kicks, and he stated, I didn't even care if I broke my leg. I don't even care if I break my leg. As long as the fans get their money's worth, and this guy knows that I'm pissed off you didn't come and put on the performance that a Donald Cerrone fight usually brings, that's how I want to end the fight. This is how I want to go out. And this is what I want Josh Berkman to look at. This is what I want guys of that who we discussed earlier to look at. And this is also going back to, what do you do with the Haraguchi who runs into a fighter who may outclass him? How will he fight next? So how do you suspect Miles will go back and regenerate himself after a loss like this?
Well, I think Miles goes back basically to square one and realizes, yes, I was 15-0, but I'd never fought anyone like Donald Cerrone before. I've never fought anyone on that level. He was better than me on the ground. He was better than me on the feet. He was quicker. He knew how to move better. These are all things that he's going to have to go back and work on. And can he do these things? Absolutely. Will he do these things? I think so. You got to remember, he's still a young kid. A very young kid, so he's got some time. He's going to reach his prime, but Cerrone is just on a different level. Cerrone truly is one of the best fighters in the lightweight division, and the matchup with Anthony Pettis certainly intrigues me as a media analyst, because I do think they match up very well. I think Cerrone will be smart enough not to give up the body kick like he did in the first fight, and if he does that, we have a completely different fight on our hands. So, yeah, I look forward to the lightweight division in 2015.
Absolutely. It's always been one of my favorite divisions for the UFC.
It is.
And I was so happy they implemented the flyweight division in the UFC, because as I've always said with boxing and other sports, your best fighters are your more technical fighters, and beautiful to watch fighters are at 126, 135, and 145. So now that we're starting to get some lower weights, we get to see that dynamic. And 155 was always the pinnacle for me, to watch Jens Pulver, BJ Penn, you know, those fights right there. That's what excited you. Even because heavyweights can sometimes put on a sluggish performance. Anything can happen, but the performance might be sluggish, and you might go to sleep. But when you see a 155 fight in the UFC, guys exchanging submissions, when you watch a Sean Shirk versus BJ Penn bout, or, you know, any of the former champions or just former contenders,
Yep.
Eves Edwards on down, you get a special, spectacular show. And you'll never replace that feeling with a heavyweight bout.
No.
You just won't.
No. Now, moving on to really the division that's the face of the UFC, which is the light heavyweight division. We had the fight that was, I don't know, billed as the biggest light heavyweight fight ever. I don't know that it was, but I will say it was certainly a fight that everyone pushed to be that. Give us your thoughts. What did you think? Obviously, Jon Jones was able to defend his title, and Daniel Cormier, you know, he brought it, I guess, but it certainly wasn't the fight I expected. What did you think?
Well, two things happened for me during that fight. One, I expected Jon Jones to be a little more dominant, even though Daniel Cormier is who he is. I thought the length, the distance, and the attributes would play more into effect. What I did see are mistakes in the champion. The mistakes that I saw, which could get him caught, as we'll discuss future contenders for him later on, Jon Jones doesn't fight like a tall fighter. He fights like an inside fighter, fights like a short fighter, which became dangerous for him when Cormier began to catch him with uppercuts, had takedown attempts, picked him up and body slammed him, walked him around, reminiscent of old Matt Hughes in the octagon, if you will, and slammed Jon Jones. And this is because Jon Jones fights like a shorter fighter. To have all those attributes, you should be more like Tommy Hearns. These guys should be at the end of your punches and going to sleep. Every time he dips down to another fighter's size, he cost himself some part of his face or chin or eye. If you're a fighter, you know this.
Yeah.
Some part of your body gets nicked up and hicked up every time you dip down to a strong, smaller fighter's range and distance. And that happened to be the case with Daniel Cormier, which is why the fight was a lot closer than the judges had it, if you ask me, in my opinion.
You know, first off, I think the big difference in this fight was as soon as Cormier realized that he wasn't stronger than Jon Jones, the fight was over. And you could see it in Cormier's eye. It was when he was in the clinch, when he was not able to muscle Jon around, when he was not able to just pick him up and throw him down like he did someone like Frank Mir and other guys at heavyweight. I think that's when everything changed for Cormier. He had no answer for Jon Jones' strength. And yes, you look at Jon Jones' little bird legs and you're like, all right, this guy can't be that strong, but he walks around at 245 pounds for a reason, because he is a big, strong dude. He's 6'4". He's not 6'8". He's not, you know, Stefan Struve. He's 6'4", 245 pounds. He is a big, strong guy, and last night he proved it. He was able to take Cormier down. He was able to use his strength to control the clinch, which was an area that I thought Cormier would be able to capitalize on. Going into the fight, I thought Cormier would be the stronger fighter, and if he was going to win, it would be because he was able to control the clinch, and he wasn't. He got whooped in the clinch. Jon Jones did show some holes. I do not think Jon Jones is the greatest fighter of all times, like people are trying to make him out to be. Yes, he has dominated a division, probably better than anyone else has, even Anderson Silva and GSP, when you just look at the former champions that he's gone through. But to be the greatest, you're going to have to do what you don't want to do. You're going to have to fight the heavyweights. You are going to have to step up to the division above you, not below you. Get that middleweight stuff out of your mind. That's nonsense. You're going to have to step up to the division above you, heavyweights. You're going to have to fight the guys like Travis Brown, Fabricio Verdum, Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos. You give me those 4 victories, and I will bow down to you as the greatest fighter of all times, because there will be no question that you're there. But until then, until he does something like that, he's the greatest light heavyweight of all times.
Absolutely. And to make a run really epic, it is all about switching weight divisions. When you mention something of that nature, BJ Penn comes to mind.
Yep.
Okay, a fighter who went from lightweight to light heavy to, you know, he fought on all levels. In Japan, he was beating guys bigger than him.
Yep.
So when you think about how the UFC first started, or mixed martial arts first started, or Valley Tudo, or No Holds Barred as we used to call it, there was no weight division.
No.
We would have to get in there with anybody,
None.
and you would have to find out. And there were a lot less rules than there are now. Hitting the back of the head wouldn't have been a problem back then. Some fights, if we go back to the IFC, groin shots were legal, okay?
Yep,
So,
soccer kicks.
yeah, there's a lot of evolving here. For me to call you the greatest fighter of all time, mixed martial arts wise, you're going to have to do more than just clean out your division. And you have a questionable fight already on your resume, the Gustafsson fight. So we may have to revisit Gustafsson, or you may have to deal with other contenders, as I said we would discuss, such as a fighter I formerly used to train, Anthony Rumble Johnson. How do you see Rumble Johnson or a rematch with Gustafsson going with John Jones?
Well, as much negative stuff as I talk about John, I do that specifically because if he's going to achieve the pinnacle of greatness that he talks about, well, guess what? I'm one of the media guys that says whether or not you've achieved that. I am telling you here what you have to do, and until you do that, you're never going to be there. But he is the greatest light heavyweight that I have ever seen. And a matchup with Gustafsson intrigues me because I think he lost that first fight. When I was scoring it, I scored it for Alexander. There was no question in my mind Alexander won that fight. How will John deal with the rematch? He's said that he didn't train, that he was out partying, doing all that kind of stuff. If that's the case, hey, you know, it is what it is. I still think the matchup is exciting. Gustafsson, with his length, with his reach, he is just as lengthy and uses his leverage just as well as John Jones. While I do think that John is the stronger fighter, John couldn't muscle Alexander around. He couldn't throw him around like he was able to do Cormier last night. He could not out-leverage Alexander Gustafsson. And again, in their fight, I think that's going to be the key. While I like John to win the rematch, it's a fight I want to see because, again, I think Gustafsson can do it. Now, the thing with Anthony Johnson that I really love is Rumble's power. John Jones still, as far as I'm concerned, has not faced a striker as good as Rumble Johnson is with the wrestling that Rumble has, because Rumble does have solid wrestling. Glover was just a stand-up fighter, and if he couldn't beat John Jones striking, he didn't have any other things to do. Well, Anthony can use his wrestling to get in close, to work the dirty boxing, to land some of those uppercuts, and I guarantee you, if Rumble lands one of those Rumble cuts, Jones is going to sleep. I mean, he will put his head right over the cage and into the cheap seats. So I really do like that matchup. I like Rumble's chances because he is able to capitalize on all the things that John Jones can't do. If he fights Rumble short, he's going to pay for it. If he comes in with his head down like that, like he did last night, he's going to eat a Rumble cut. You know, he's going to pay for it. Rumble will put it on him, and so that fight intrigues me. So there's a couple things that I want to see John Jones do, but again, if he's able to get those 2 victories, he's got to go up to heavyweight because there's nothing left for him at light heavyweight.
Absolutely. And speaking of being the greatest, as you put forth, you need to climb some weight divisions. Rumble went from 170 to 185 to 205. He could also go to heavyweight. A lot of people don't know, when he came down here and I worked with him to cut for the Tommy Spear fight, he came to me at 225 pounds. I cut him to 168. So when you talk about a weight
vicious
cut and then coming back up and gaining power and reasons why he didn't want to cut or couldn't cut, he was walking around as a heavyweight then. So Rumble definitely is now at a weight that feels and looks good for him.
Yes.
And he's beaten some of the better fighters that some used to be former UFC champions. Andrei Arlovsky, who could have been knocked out in the second round of their bout at the World Series of Fighting, they deemed it that it was after the bell, but this is Rumble knocking out a heavyweight champion, so you know his striking power transpires. Then he knocked out Nogueira. Uppercuts. Same thing Cormier just hit John Jones with all night. And if Rumble hits you with one of those uppercuts, it's a little different than Cormier hitting you with one of those uppercuts.
Yes.
So there are different dynamics to his fighting ability. And Gustafsson gave John Jones trouble as well. Well documented. No one thinks John Jones won that fight. So those two are now facing each other. The winner to go on to fight Cormier or to fight John Jones in this next bout. Who do you see winning that bout, Gustafsson or Johnson?
I go back and forth, but right now I hate to say it, I have to go with Rumble Johnson. I think his striking is too good. While Gustafsson might get some takedowns to save him from being knocked out, I don't think Gustafsson is strong enough to hold Rumble down and control him on the ground. I think Rumble will pop back up. And again, when we're talking punch for punch, I guarantee you that a punch from Anthony Johnson hurts 3 times as hard as a punch from Gustafsson. So I like Rumble's chances in this fight, and I like Rumble's matchup with John Jones. I think he's a very intriguing matchup because again, at his size, it's 6'2", 205 pounds. He's not a small guy. He's not going to be dwarfed by John Jones. He is going to be able to deal with Jones's length, and so. Will he win the fight? We'll have to wait and see. But again, looking at it on paper, breaking it down, absolutely. If we were playing video games right now, these are fights that I would be matching up. Because, yeah, they're fights that I think, again, they match up very well on paper. A guy like Glover, I gave no shot against John Jones because he didn't offer him anything other than strikes. Rumble does. Rumble will kick you in the head, you know, and he has the legs to actually get up to John Jones' 6'4" dome. So I like his chances.
Absolutely. And Gustafsson, as tough as he is, I don't see a lot of things that he can do striking-wise to offset what Rumble does now. Melkor is one of Rumble's coaches, well-documented coach. He's over there with Tyrone Spong. So you're talking about the Glory champion.
Yep.
Training with you on a regular basis. What do you have to offer him, Gustafsson, that he hasn't seen before?
You know, it's funny you bring that up because Gustafsson got beat by Phil Davis. So what did he do? He went out and trained with Phil Davis to get better. We saw what Anthony Johnson did to Phil Davis. I mean, he just manhandled him, made him look like a ragdoll, like a guy that should not even be in the UFC. And to be real honest, I think Rumble took it easy on him. I think Rumble could have and should have finished that fight at times. So if that's the style of fighting that Gustafsson is going to come in with, he's going to suffer the same fate. In order to beat Rumble, you're going to have to be able to control him at some point. And I don't think Gustafsson can control his striking. And again, on the ground, he is not big enough, he's not strong enough to control. You know, it was one thing when Josh Koscheck did it when Rumble was 170 pounds after dropping from, like you said, 225 pounds. So tired, so beat, didn't have the cardio to deal with that kind of stuff. Well, he doesn't have those diminishing returns anymore because he's not cutting that significant amount of weight. He's cutting an appropriate amount of weight. He's 10 times as strong. He's 3 times as fast. He is vicious. And again, as he continues to progress with his new coaches and working with the team at Black Zillions down in Florida, the guy's a beast. You know, he is a beast. There's a reason why Anthony Johnson is getting the push and Rashad Evans isn't.
And to build on that, these guys use the legal tactics on accident. Rumble was poked in the eye 2 times during that fight with Koscheck. Josh
Yeah.
also faked being kneed in the head during that fight, which Rumble looked like he was getting ready to finish him up during that portion of the bout. So styles make fights. Moments in fights can change the dynamic of how it's going throughout the evening. And I really don't see a whole lot that Gustafsson can do to stop what's about to happen to him. I think Rumble will go on, and I predict he'll probably be the next 205-pound champion if he faces John Jones in the octagon.
It definitely could happen. So a couple of things. Where does Cormier go from here? What do you think Cormier does?
That's a good question. Does Daniel Cormier's stock drop because of a loss to John Jones? Make sure you go on to MMA Meltdown, type in, also go to MMA Corner, type in what you think. Give us your opinion. We want to know. These things are important to us. Me personally, I don't think he lost any ground. It's one thing to be 15-0. It's another thing to be 15-1. But when you have a loss under those circumstances and against who you lost to, let me ask you: did Joe Frazier lose any ground when he lost to Ali the first time?
No.
Let me ask you this:
okay.
when Sugar Ray beat Thomas Hearns, did Thomas Hearns lose any ground?
No.
When Marvelous Marvin Hagler beat Roberto Duran, did he lose any ground?
No.
Roberto gained more fans because they thought he won the fight, in fact, but he lost. So when you lose to a fighter of the caliber of a John Jones, you don't really have anything to tuck your head down to. And he also gave John Jones one of the better fights that we've seen anyone give John Jones. I mean, we've seen him beat up Shogun.
Yes.
In a matter of moments. We've seen him run through the 205-pound division. There's only two fighters who have pressed him: Gustafsson and Daniel Cormier. Rashad Evans did a decent job.
You know, I got to be honest. I have to disagree here. I think Cormier's stock significantly dropped, and I will tell you the big reason why. There's not one person in all of MMA land right now that woke up this morning and said, you know what, if Cormier would have done this, he'd have won that fight. Cormier got hosed. So with that being said, where does Cormier go? What does he do? He's an old man. He doesn't have time to go back to the drawing board, fix things up, and get back in there and get his title shot. And not to mention, how many people want to see that fight again? I'm pretty sure now that I've seen it once, I know what it's going to be like 99 times out of 100. I think Cormier's performance last night really killed him. He had all this hype. He was the Strikeforce heavyweight Grand Prix champion. He did all these great things, went in against John Jones and offered him nothing. I mean, yes, he hit him with shots and this and that, but at no point in time did anyone ever think, oh my God, John Jones is in trouble. We're about to see a new champion. It wasn't like with Gustafsson where, again, at the start of the 5th round, you were on the edge of your seat thinking we're about to see history being made. There was nothing like that. No one is thinking, all right, Cormier can do this and get another title shot. I think his stock completely dropped. I think now, as long as John Jones is the champion, he's a gatekeeper of the division.
I'm going to disagree on a few points, only because in the 2nd round, when John kind of wobbled and wavered in the wind a little bit, I thought there could be a new champion. There's two things that I knew, and I told my friends who watched the UFC, that I thought would happen. One, Daniel Cormier has the size of a Mike Tyson, but he doesn't have the movement of a Mike Tyson.
No.
And he doesn't throw punches in combinations.
No.
So if Daniel Cormier is to improve, you need to get more, you need an elite striking coach. And you need to be more creative in your movement. He still moves like a wrestler. He goes straight forward.
Yep.
And he ate shots because he goes straight forward. If he had any sort of head movement or any sort of lateral movement, then that fight could have been different looking altogether. And he never threw many combinations. There were like a few, here's a 3-punch combination. And then he really loaded up after the bell rang after the 5th round. But you need to do that during the fight and do it all night. He landed some good shots, and I thought he actually won 2 of the 5. So I had the fight a lot closer than the judges did. And the judges obviously thought John lost a round. They scored it, 49-46.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think it was clear that Cormier won the 2nd round. I don't think anyone would dispute that. I think I look
how
at
would you score the 5th round? Let me ask you. John, that's when Cormier picked him up. Or was that the 5th or the 4th?
that was the 5th round.
Yeah.
when he got the takedown. You could give Cormier that round if you really wanted to, but since I'm not a judge, I don't have to break it down round by round. I look at the totality of the fight,
Right.
and Cormier was, while there were points that he was in that fight, if this was a football game, it would have been like Oregon, Florida State, 59-20. I mean, it was, while there were opportunities, he just didn't capitalize on them. He did not do what he needed to do, and I think that hurt him. When JDS knocked out Cain Velasquez, it didn't really hurt Cain because it was just a one-punch knockout, all right? Anybody can get caught. We know that. Cain came back and just completely whooped JDS and then did it again. And he did it with a style that I thought Cormier was going to use against John Jones. I thought he'd press him, keep him backpedaling, use angles with his striking to set up his takedowns. He did nothing. He walked straight forward, like you said. There was no movement. He, really looked like a rhino out there with no lateral movement, just straight forward, and he paid the price. And I can't say he choked under the pressure because he's been to the big time before. So I really do think it was his skills and his game plan. And so he's got some work to do if he's ever going to beat John Jones. But who knows? While I talk all the trash about John Jones that I can, it is possible that we are seeing the evolution of the greatest fighter ever, and maybe he is just that good, and that's why Cormier looks so bad,
Definite possibilities, definitely new zeniths and new mountains to climb as we look forward to UFC 183. The female bout on the card this evening featured a young lady from Belize, and I call her young lady because Dana White would not let her in the UFC house because she was too old, he said during the post-fight press conference. She came back and said, it wasn't that I was too old. He told me, get a few fights under my belt, see what I can do, and then we possibly let you win. She definitely looked pretty awesome last night.
Yeah, Marion Renaud and Alexis Dufresne. Marion, she did look awesome. She did not look awesome on Friday against Scale when she missed weight by 3 pounds. But other than that, absolutely, she looked awesome. She looked dominant. She's someone that I cannot wait to see progress through the division. Is she beating Ronda Rousey now? Absolutely not. Four fights from now? That's something that intrigues me, absolutely. She's not someone that I'd want to fight because I know she'd beat the crap out of me. So she has all the intangibles and all the skills that right now, again, as a media person that I look for, who can beat Ronda Rousey? Because she is the pinnacle of the division. Who's got the skill set? Who's got the attributes that one day when they match up could possibly beat her? She is one of the ladies, and there are very few out there, obviously. Cyborg, if that fight ever happens, I do like her chances against Ronda, but there are very few ladies out there where when I match them up, Ronda wins that fight 100 times. And a few fights, a little bit more progression for this woman, I think, again, she matches up very well.
Absolutely. I think we're going to have to see her change coaching strategies eventually, or add a coach, because she seemed against a tall, more lethargic opponent to not be able to take advantage like we know Ronda Rousey can. Ronda Rousey can go to her judo immediately.
Yep.
This fight for her was not bad, but she ran into a few jabs. She caught a few shots. She was even rocked one time and played it off real well. But I don't think I saw future champion written on her yet, as you've already cross-examined her. I think what she needs is she's either going to have to hit another level, which could be difficult to do because of her age, or she's going to have to step up her power so that she can get rid of girls faster with big shots.
Yep.
Or she's going to have to change one of her coaching strategies, or one of her coaches, so to speak, which fighters don't like to hear, coaches don't like to hear, but you have a 35-year-old fighter who could be fighting at the pinnacle of the division, and she doesn't appear to have all the tools to get the job done. So you got to make a change somewhere.
Yep. And it's no disrespect to say that a fighter needs to change coaches. While certain coaches out there are great in certain areas, there are other coaches that can get more out of fighters for whatever reason, personal relationships, all of that kind of stuff. So making changes, that's not anything disrespectful. In fact, again, if you want to be the best, sometimes you have to look at your best friend and say, you know what, we're not doing it together. I need to go here and at least see if I can get there, because otherwise, again, a fighter's career is so limited, and her at 35, her window is very limited. You got to capitalize on these opportunities now, and if the coaching change is what it stands between you and greatness, make the change.
Absolutely. There's not a lot of Randy Couture's running around. You just don't have that many of those. That's a special individual. How special are you? She has to ask herself that question.
Exactly.
And it has to translate in her performances.
Yep. Otherwise, but again, don't want to take anything away from what she's done. She did look good, but if she's going to get here, championship level, I mean, there's a lot of growth that needs to be done.
And not necessarily lose a coach, but adding a coach.
Yes.
To bring more out.
Exactly.
It just looks like that's what you're going to have to do if you want to beat a Ronda Rousey, because she can definitely beat some other individuals in the UFC without question. She's a top contender, without a doubt, from her performance.
Absolutely.
So that's going to do it for us for MMA Meltdown, UFC 182. It's a wrap here for us. Me, Josh Davis. We'd like to thank Bill from MMA Meltdown, and we'll see you soon. Watch the fights.